So thank you to everybody joining this talk. I hope it creates some questions and explorations from the kind of architecture that we're producing that helps to contribute to the overall architectural culture that we see developing today. A little bit about me. Okay, my name is Charlie Hearn. I'm from the UK, but I have British and Hong Kong Chinese heritage. I studied architecture a number of places actually, but I culminated my studies at the Bartlett, which is part of University College London, a good while ago. And perhaps it was there that I solidified my way of thinking, my rhythm of design, kind of really challenged myself to pursue a kind of architecture that was authentic to my own upbringing and my own observations of life. From there, I worked in London, I've worked in Edinburgh, I've worked in Brighton, I've worked for some big commercial firms, such as Make Architects, where I worked with a lot of great engineers such as Arup and Bureau Hapholz. But in 2009, I moved to Bali, Indonesia, for a sense of adventure, something new, something fresh. And it was here, once I set up, I decided to open my own practice called Inspiral Architecture and Design Studios. So what is Inspiral Architecture and Design Studios? Well, it's quite a youthful practice. It's not just architects. We're a mixture of engineers, being structural, mechanical, interior designers, artists, artisans, entrepreneurs. So we're a collective of people that share a passion for dynamic, sustainable kind of architecture that really helps improve our well-being. So we work on a number of types of projects, everything from obviously hospitality, being in Bali. Bali is obviously well known for its hospitality aspects, but we do residential, we do places of recreation, we've been looking into social housing, event spaces. So our work is fairly wide-ranging. But within the company, we share a kind of philosophy, and it's quite a simple one. And this is our kind of saying that to improve our well-being, we need to be inspired by the spaces we live in, the built environment, the natural, and their harmonious existence. So perhaps this isn't always the case. This picture is something that I was actually very used to growing up. During my childhood, I would spend a lot of time in Hong Kong, staying in somewhere very much like this. And it was kind of a mix between where I lived in England, which was kind of quiet village in the countryside. I'd spend a lot of my summers and holidays, Easters, Chinese New Year, coming to Hong Kong, to this metropolis, where I was completely disconnected from nature. Even though Hong Kong itself is surrounded by great hills and there is greenery there, once you're in Hong Kong and in the city, it practically doesn't exist. So I had these two conflicting aspects of growing up, which had a kind of significant impact in this kind of conflict we have between our built environment and the way it's been inserted into the natural, which really impacted the way I felt and the way I orientated myself. So Hong Kong was I think is perhaps, especially during the 80s, I mean, it was a time of economic boom. There was construction everywhere, there was noise, there was large amounts of pollution, there was density around us. And I think probably Hong Kong perhaps is significant because it's probably the most, at that point, it's probably the most extreme example of how our recent past, especially from the Industrial Revolution, you know, continuing to this exponential growth of the free market throughout the 20th century, it epitomizes this conflict that we've been now getting accustomed to, where we see all over the world, especially in China and you know, fast developing places, which has conflicted massively to our natural world. But there was one aspect of Hong Kong, funny enough, that I did find a kind of connection to nature in a kind of weird sense. It was this cemetery. There's a huge cemetery in the middle of Hong Kong, kind of up towards the hills, and this was the only time I would actually experience a sense of greenery and nature. The journey going up there, and then being in this cemetery itself, even though the cemetery is completely covered in concrete, there's headstone after headstone with a photograph of each person looking directly at you. It was funny because it was, I think it was the first experience I had where architecture followed or almost mimicked a natural form. It was just probably the most unique place in Hong Kong, which is very orthogonal and perpendicular, whereas this place was, as you can see, it was very organic. It followed the contours of the hills. So there was a kind of mimicry going on there that was really apparent and quite influenced me quite a lot. Kind of ironic that, you know, the place where people would return to nature is when they're dead and buried. And it, you know, it kind of asked the question, you know, why is it when we die that that's the point where we always want to return and be connected to nature, when in fact we spend most of our lives being disconnected from it, more so. So throughout my architectural journey, I've always looked to see how we can connect, how our man-made physical interventions can be truly harmonized and symbiotic with nature. And then we've seen it. We've seen it through art. We've seen it through terms of, in some ways, harnessing energies, or old temple structures. You know, primitive architecture. Well, we call it primitive. In many ways, it's really advanced. But some of these older forms of building have great examples of this symbiotic relationship we have. And perhaps for me, the greatest one, you know, the one that I find influences me the most, and I always come back to this when I'm looking to design, is perhaps simplistically the rice field. The rice field is a very much a man-made intervention that symbolically, functionally, experientially, and energetically embodies this harmonious man-made relationship with nature. And what I'm going to do throughout this talk, I will pick up these words and the implications of these and how they feed into our own design program. But to start off, I mean, obviously, we know that our connection to nature in many ways is our connection to ourselves, because nature is actually our inherent, the natural world is our own inherent nature. But I would like to take a few quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great 18th century transcendentalist. And I'll take a few quotes from here. Nature whose floods of life stream around and through us. Nature is a discipline of the understanding and intellectual truths. We know more from nature than we can at will communicate. To the body and mind which have been cramped by noxious work or company, nature is medicinal and restores their tone. So in this way, when I look at what I call holistic architecture, or bioholistic architecture, I see it as the path to connect to our own sentience. And when we look at well-being and holistic health, or when we do a holistic health assessment, you know, there's a general format to holistic health. And these are 7 dimensions that we can see in this diagram: social, spiritual, physical, emotional, sense of purpose, the intellectual, and of course the environmental. And all these aspects actually very much are the same aspects that we consider when we're designing architecture in any sense. So I think holistic health is very much part of, or the essential part of, the architectural design program. And funny enough, I mean, if we look at the oldest known architect, perhaps we don't study this much at all, you know, I mean, is Imhotep, who is, he is the first architect in known history. He lived in the 3rd dynasty of Egypt between 2650 to 2600 BC. He was the vizier or prime minister to the king. He was the priest of the sun, so he was a spiritual leader as well at Heliopolis. And he's actually also the architect who built the oldest still standing stone monument on earth, which is the pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara. He was also, and this interestingly, he was also a physician. So he was very much into health and the holistic aspect and well-being. And actually, because he was so good at that, he became a kind of deity of medicine. So perhaps the forefather of architecture really, as a profession, is geared towards this idea of holistic design. So going back to those 4 points that inspired me from the rice field, I'd first like to take on the aspect of symbolism, and the symbolism of our work, which is this kind of metaphysical, hyperreal, the idea of using our aspect of design of nature, bringing it back into our sense of consciousness. So this is a project which is actually a community center with pavilions, parks, and places of relaxation. This is an events pavilion which perhaps is used for ceremony. This is in an island called Sulawesi, and its capital city, Makassar. And it becomes a kind of place, an alternate world from the hustle and bustle of quite a busy city to somewhere that gives a different experience. Still under construction at the moment, but its design is gone in a direction which brings back the symbolism of the natural world and into a playful sense that creates experience and a sense of longing for what we relate to in a symbolic way of nature. And then from this was the first part of the design. This continued to influence the rest of the community that was built around it. So what you find in Indonesia is there's a lot of these typical townhouse type architectures. It's kind of certain typology of terrace housing. So we used this symbolism and this direction of architecture to kind of bring a level of humanity and individualism back into the setting out of all these individual houses, which would flow from the main center of this community area throughout the whole master plan. And even this flowed through to the inside as well. So we have these interesting spiral staircases and interiors which are very flowing and soft and all-encompassing to the sense of living. Less so machine for living, but perhaps what we would think more like is a womb experience. So obviously, you know, when we start in our journey of life, the womb is actually a very functional space, which, like the aspect of the functional aspect of the rice field, it's there to feed, it's there to nurture, it's there to provide sustain living. So that's perhaps where we spend most of our time is in our bedrooms. So generally throughout the way if we look at the way we design from the inside out, our bedrooms are very soft. There's very little in the way of hard corners or sharp edges. We prefer this rounded, naturally orientated organic feel, both in materiality, their form, and their aspect. So we can look at the bedroom as a space where it heals us. From that, it can expand to the rest of the architecture. And this is what it does. I mean, when we're designing our forms or our buildings, you know, this sense of flowing and softness from the layout to to how we start to develop physically, as well as taking in all the functional aspects of what constitutes a house, understanding the environment, sun patterns, wind, ways which we can have natural ventilation and evaporative cooling. I mean, all these things are aspects that come into the fold as well as our own integral philosophy. So this translates into our rooms, where it begins to have a bit of an impact on how we experience space. So this would perhaps be the kind of a typical residence where, for us, which would feel more integrated with elements of nature, through its materiality, through its form, through the way it functions, in terms of minimizing energy, to the flow of space, and how the sense of user experience is perhaps less typical to what one would experience in say a minimalist box. But then when we're doing residence, we also have to consider how this works overall in a master plan. I mean, we from doing individual houses, we also look at how this type of vernacular can be experienced in a community setting as well. So we look to see how we can create sustainable communities, looking at how just even the setup of the buildings themselves can kind of mimic the surrounding landscape. Even in that sense, it creates this connection between the insertion of built aspects to the natural context as well. So, I mean, and when we look at what eco or sustainable villages, what their intentions are, we can see how they look to live in harmony with the environment, and with the emphasis of protecting the land around them, and working together, so the integrity of the land isn't ruined. Generally, I mean, when we look at a sustainable community, we're looking at energy conservation as an essential part of developing sustainable communities, the conservation of energy as resources, using as much clean energy as possible. For example, using a lot of grey water systems, using natural materials, local materials that come from the site, minimizing a bit large, heavy structures, keeping buildings light, so the impact on the ground is much less. Looking how it can, even in an economic point of view, support local business, and look to be efficient in the way it runs. And now part of that sustenance for a community is having the facilities that provide different aspects. So that for this project was a residential resort. So we created Clubhouse as a focal point and as a community center to serve all the different aspects and ways of living that in this large master plan. And from sometimes looking at this large, low density spread out area, we also do something more, look at buildings which are more compact. This would be an apartment building where you would have the diagram, the typical diagram perhaps of your 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom to 3 bedroom places. But what we look for here is still that sense of individuality. Looking at the kind of unity in diversity. I think even as we want to be connected, we to help become connected, we still need to celebrate the individualism. So I think that's important, even in these condensed blocks, where we can bring that and do things like play with the facades, integrating the natural materials from stone to recycled timbers, and of course greenery itself. So they become less like modules, but more like a connection of parts. Here, even in a larger scale, this is using the same requirement for condensed living in this apartment style scenario, but creating a sense of a community. And of course, being in somewhere like Bali, it's very natural to have that kind of resort feeling. Now, I think we're lucky that we can celebrate living in a way which feels like we're on holiday, as opposed to the other way around, slogging it out for a holiday. The idea here is that we have destinations within the destination. So from the range of apartments itself to lagoon, a central lagoon pool, various restaurants, jogging tracks. We have even a sense of gardens, different areas and zones to explore. Again, creating this kind of oasis, this tropical oasis, which helps every dweller who from within their room to looking out over the whole complex, feel this connection with nature overall. So here would be one of the restaurants within the complex, and again, I would see this almost like as a flower of the garden. There's something that very much feels like it grows from the ground, while at the same time, collecting rainwater and using natural materials. It brings life to these kind of spaces and a sense of energy. So we're creating worlds within worlds, which for me, is something exciting. If you can go somewhere where there's a constant sense of discovery, even within an area which is, say a couple of hectares, you feel like you can discover new elements throughout your movement within the development. And even here, we can still create holistic spaces. I think a lot of the culture these days, this is an events, a yoga space. And we find now that with a lot of the developments we do, there is a requirement for yoga facilities, holistic spaces, places where there's perhaps a sense of ceremony, which can encompass different types of people, different religions, to express something which enhances well-being. So moving on to the experiential side, and this is many ways how the technology creates the experience, what aspects or implementations of building creates a user experience which can get passed on from one person to another. So while we were on yoga studios, for us are like the new churches or the modern day temple, and we enjoy designing these kind of spaces because it does look to elevate an extent, to some extent it's reintroducing a kind of esoteric requirement that has been lost in a lot of modern society. But unlike, I guess, a lot of the these kind of spaces from the past, which were perhaps more monolithic, harder materials, we like now to bring a softer element, and bamboo, in this case, is a great way to do that. It has a softness and a tactileness that we can feel very connected, and create a geometry which can can inspire. Here's another yoga studio we did, which this one kind of sits on the top of a cliff. The form of it is a hyperbolic paraboloid, which is a very natural, reoccurring natural mathematical geometric shape which appears in nature. And again, bamboo gives us the opportunity to create these forms and introduce this connection to natural geometry. You know, I think we've seen throughout the ages where the subconscious has definitely had a connection to geometry, which with its sequencing kind of has an integral aspect which helps us very much connect overall to the sense of art, to nature, but also to the outer cosmos. And here, looking up at the roof, that sense of cosmos is integrating lighting into it, and perhaps this is an ode to the past in previous temples, where when we look up to these vaulted ceilings, the geometry helps to bring significance to from the micro of ourselves to the macro at large. So this yoga studio was actually part of a resort we did called Ulaman Eco Retreat, and this the experience of doing this was very much a journey into how we can implement architecture into a site, into a setting which perhaps one of the most beautiful settings I've seen of the site. So it's very personal to me how I wanted to keep the integrity of this stunningly beautiful area, and work in a way which enhances both the existing site itself and also the user experience of connecting to this place using architecture and its capabilities of providing habitation. So when we planned out the buildings, we really studied the site from its every contour to its every existing tree, to work our buildings around the existing trees, especially the large old trees that would have been, you know, if would have been cut down if a building was going to go in its place. Whereas smaller trees or palm trees, we were able to move a lot of these. So the biodiversity of the site wasn't minimized in any way. From conceptualizing, the buildings themselves, again, where there's a space which is so vibrant, we wanted these buildings to embody this sense of life and intrinsic natural energy that's running throughout the site. So we did this with our sketches and developed this into physical 3D models. Of course, we do this. We explore it with our renderings, but these are all ways I think are really important. You know, especially as we designed a lot of this, we spent a lot of time there at the site itself, bringing back these sketches, bringing back these models, and just viewing them in real time to see how they really integrate properly. And, you know, it was a constant loop feedback from the site into our design, back into the site, vice versa. So when it came to the construction process, we decided that we wanted to use as much of the existing elements of the site as possible. So on the site there was a lot of bamboo which we could reuse into the building and treat. We wanted to use all the earth that we dug from cut and fill and reintegrate them into the building. So we decided to, our route was to go and use rammed earth as our main form of walls throughout the site. And this is where we had a lot of fun making maquettes to understand the layers and the colors of this beautifully rich soil. And this earth became the founding part of the building. From even in its sequence of construction, there's always the earth, the grounded part that came first, and then from that, everything in terms of the bamboo geometry and structure was built around it. And even in building process itself, it felt very integrated throughout, as if the elements themselves were just moved, extracted, and then regrown from the ground to create these buildings. So by the end, we ended up with an array of different structures, each performing their own function, which really was open. It was organic. It's from every angle, we had a sense of being totally immersed in this luscious tropical surrounding. Even the flow of the buildings. I mean, you know, we wanted to have a sense of majesty as each building glided down the hill. And then we could bring in elements. I mean, we had all these existing walls that were actually part of the site at one point was used as a quarry for natural block building blocks that were very popular about 20 years ago. And what was left was a lot of these walls. So we carved into these walls. And within no time, these walls became green and ended up making these carvings look as if they'd existed for thousands of years. And then, of course, we could bring elements of water, light, and these you know, elements that reflected these Fibonacci sequences throughout the form of the buildings. And here we can see we have nice interplay of rammed earth, the lines of structure of bamboo, and forms, again, very mathematical forms that end up mimicking, you know, forms of surrounding leaf canopies. And I think what was very nice was just even though there was a lot of things kind of going on, there's a lot of movement in lines and flow. As they all kind of merge into each other, it does bring a sense of calmness, perhaps, which is a kind of opposite to the kind of minimalist approach to design. I think you can have a form of architecture that brings serenity when every element is working together and connecting. And in that sense, I think that's what helps the dweller, the human, who is also another element in this environment, feel more connected. And here we can see we use different elements. We have the elements of the rammed earth, the bamboo, and even the bamboo itself. We would play with a bit to bring a sense of freshness from our coatings to help its longevity, and also to bring different tones to perhaps what a lot of people might expect of bamboo architecture, and mix it in with things like recycled timbers, you know, to create entrance spaces that really amplify that sense of threshold from coming from the inside to the outside, but in the sense of a screen where it kind of blurs that barrier at the same time. And the interesting about this site is we're connected onto a river. The whole site's connected onto a river. So with the river, we decided to harness that. We're actually doing the extension on the other side of this river, and we're building we're actually reintroducing a lake that was once cut off at some point when they were directing water for the surrounding rice fields. So we've reintroduced a lake, and this lake creates enough volume of water to power hydroelectric turbines, which are set at a lower level than the lake. So it's the water pressure from this vast volume of water can power, can run through these turbines and help to power the resort. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to share a video just to show what this video, what we're going to do to this site. Let's have a look. Okay. Let's share this again. Yes. So this is the extension of the other side. And this has been a chance for us to explore other sustainable types of building and architecture. This is the lake aspect that we're building. So this is kind of an expansion of the resort, taking the same strategy of keeping the integrity of the existing nature and just further adding and complementing to it. Again, with rammed earth, bamboo structures, we're creating these little worlds inside the resort. So you can, in the back there, you can see the existing architecture, and creating communal areas which have a sense of wonder, using large natural rock, natural stone, all locally sourced. Going back here, we still have in our temples, we have a restaurant area. And here we have, you can see here, this is a kind of green grass covered structure which houses a spa. We have extended forms of this type of vernacular within the resort, making most use of rammed earth, integrating this to the surrounding rivers. These are the restaurant structures, really celebrates the geometry. And here, this kind of semi-underground structure will be made using sit panels. So these are using recycled EPS with polymer renders. And these are very lightweight but incredibly strong materials, which can then contain all this earth-covered structure. So again, maintaining the biodiversity of the site. Here we have more accommodation. Each one of these overlooking the river. And this lake actually will be swimmable. So that we'll have water running through from the surrounding rivers into this lake. And up here is units which are extended up towards the tree canopies and give a different perspective of the surrounding nature. And this is actually under construction at the moment. I think hopefully next year it'll be complete. That's our presentation. Okay. So linking from that use of water, we've come to another project, a different project here, which harnesses water. And this also is like a kind of flip from where we're creating architecture that was inserted into nature. This is a great developing building within an urban environment and doing what we can to bring nature back into this urban environment. So in terms of water, what you have here are these, what I would say, are large water collecting funnels. These also is also the roof, as well as the interior as well. And what these do, these collect rainwater and bring water all the way through into the building, which is then filtered and used throughout all the plumbing and for consumption as well. And it helps to address the issue of water in Bali, through development, overdevelopment, especially in the hospitality industry. There are concerns of a water shortage. And many of the aquifers close to the coastal areas are drying out or becoming contaminated with salts due to extensive boring. So this building was in many ways an expression of addressing that issue, both by creating this kind of green indoor oasis, indoor garden, but also highlighting this issue of water and bringing it into the building. So with these fabric funnels, the fabric itself is of a translucent material. So actually, when it's raining, they become kind of like inverted waterfalls and becomes a showpiece that creates quite an experience for diners and people who come to this place, and becomes a point of conversation, which then highlights this issue of water. I think it's always so interesting how how we can take very urban aspects and use nature. So we have during the daytime, this building is full of light through the translucency of the material, which helps to create this this internal garden, bringing back nature and bringing back that connection in. and very much keeping it a destination. You know, it's in an area like Bali where there isn't, especially in the urban areas, there isn't a lot of town planning for open green spaces and parks. This is one way we can help to integrate that back in. And throughout, even with a lot of the materiality, once we have that theme running throughout the building, it helps to transfer itself onto every element within the building, from these kind of dining pods, which again mimic a lot of these aspects of natural culture that, or nature that's been abstracted to a cultural experience that we see a lot in Bali. While we're on restaurants, is another restaurant we're doing. And again, this one flips back to a very natural setting. This is a forest where we are inserting buildings which completely mimic their environment, from their form to a sense of a unified kind of parasite, almost a parasite that kind of works with its host to create something something better. So this is like a series of pods where we had to study which trees could support certain weights, and create a kind of a connection from tree to tree up within these canopies. And then the materials themselves, using recycled wood, coffee wood, which again kind of lends itself to creating these interesting forms, and something quite different in terms of our spatial recognition, but still very much tactile and soft, and feels very harmonious with the natural flow of the area. And in the same time, we can still put in, you know, things like kitchens and glass, and a lot of these very strong human elements that are required for the function of the building. But they can kind of integrate seamlessly. And the same way, in this way, we can do the same with abstracting nature. I mean, that was the past example, was using elements of nature, and here this day is perhaps using less aspects of natural materials, but abstracting it in such a way that it reconnects us still to this organic element and the organicness of our own nature. So again, this playing with light, and playing with how, you know, it looks like light is supporting something heavy and dense, perhaps something symbolic of the something ephemeral, which supports the material. We use light in many ways to kind of help describe this aspect. This here is actually a place for wellness, a holistic space. It's a spa, and even areas with such areas as corridors. We find corridors are very important spaces that you know, can be used to describe our transitions and rites of passage as we journey through our experience. All of these materials up here, this is all strand woven pressed bamboo, which has a beautiful rich texture. Everything here is bespoke. but brings a very rich quality, very rich natural quality that sometimes some people describe it as a kind of eco lux. Which brings us onto our next aspect, which is the energetic part. Now, going from something where we talk about light, a lot of light, I have one very interesting client who was fascinated by darkness. So he was he wanted to build a dark room retreat. This is a place where you could live and work, but for certain times you would be able to close up the whole structure and be in pitch black darkness, but still have the instead of being like some people might compare it to solitary confinement in a jail. It is that kind of solitude and darkness, but also would still have the facility to be able to wash and eat and still function in this state of darkness. So this building really wanted to, as it's cut itself off from nature when it's closed up, and you're left in this darkness. We still looked to create something that had a connection obviously on a much deeper level. So we took on we looked at certain geometries and how they played out, and we looked at this kind of Merkaba form, which is something which is a very geometric shape, something that we find throughout the universe. It's based on isotropic vector, which is a term coined by Buckminster Fuller. And this is when Buckminster was doing his essays on synergetics and how synergetics follows the cosmic logic of structural mathematics and strategies of nature. And this is something that's actually been repeated throughout history, from, say, something like the pyramids. But, you know, I think it also relates to the resonance theory, you know, how everything is constantly in motion. Now, our understanding of matter as a solid entity is actually kind of quite misconstrued, where in actual fact, everything is in motion, it's vibrating. So even objects that appear to be stationary are all oscillating and resonating at various frequencies. And it's these frequencies that creates the formation of what we believe to be our perception of matter. And then the interesting thing is, obviously, with this, when we have these oscillations of different aspects and different states, when they combine and there's certain harmonics, that's when interesting things can happen. So the idea with this type of architecture is that once in the dark, the form of the building, its positioning and structural geometry can help enhance this sense of resonance, and obviously into our own understanding of self and well-being, which kind of is like what has always been an exploration throughout history, especially with the golden ratio. You know, I mean, you know, we've seen it throughout, and obviously the pyramids itself is an example, which something which really exactly follows the golden ratio. And then perhaps maybe, you know, more recent times, we, you know, perhaps this last century, you know, we've come to look at it to understand, you know, what the idea of perfect beauty is, or you know, its appearance, or this sense of proportion that was always idealized from basing things on the golden section. I guess what I would like to feel is that perhaps now we're getting to a stage of where we're going back to perhaps reverse engineering these kind of Fibonacci sequences into our 3D computational design. And perhaps then we can allow this, this form of energy where which the golden ratio represents back into our buildings. When we see the golden ratio throughout nature, it's kind of a manifestation of what we can describe as say life force, or some people call it chi or whatever. But obviously, if this is a manifestation of that, then by reverse engineering it, perhaps we can bring this force, this life back into our buildings, which will then transfer onto us. So a lot of our buildings now, we have moved on to see how we can, using a lot of these Fibonacci sequences, how we can then invite or give that, how that intention of inviting this life force back into our buildings. And even in situations, I mean, some of these past examples, it looks like it's quite easy where there's a lot of, we have space, we have land, and we can be very expressive to bring this intention back. But I think even in urban environments, we still have these opportunities to bring this back in. Playing with the geometry, from our facades where space is tight, there's always an opportunity to bring this sense in and invite this energy back into the building, from the outside to the inside. And perhaps at this end starts to hark back to some of the Gothic examples, which celebrates geometry and nature together. And then also hence back into our rooms, which are very soft and womb-like. Even if spaces are small, there is opportunity there. And even this is another example. Again, we all know often when we're designing high-rises, and area and space is a big condition. So unfortunately, the orthogonal or perpendicular is sometimes so steeply set where it doesn't give much room for kind of more wild interpretations of a building form. We still look to see, okay, where our constrictions apply, we can still create little opportunities to allow for this philosophy to translate itself through the building. So here, this building, even bringing elements of bamboo. This is actually in Kathmandu, somewhere where there's vast amounts of bamboo, which always had a kind of stigma as being a low-class material or a village-based material. And in this sense, we're bringing it back to somewhere far more high-end, and into a scene right within the city, where we can have that sense of tactileness and softness and interest, which can inspire our wonderment of various spaces. It'd be nice if our material, could be, the materials that we use could be assessed in terms of their resonance. At the moment, if we're looking at the energy of materials, we tend to look at energy of their embodied energy, obviously from a sustainability point of view, which is great. And I guess it would be a no-brainer if material, that natural materials have a frequency of resonance which is more suited to our own frequencies. But yeah, perhaps in the future where we combine elements of composites or recycling or certain elements, different materials that we're not used to building before, and how they combine, how they can increase certain resonances. For example, for reinforcement now, we've been looking at things like basalt, and perhaps when you combine something like basalt with earth or with timber, perhaps there's this oscillation that occurs, and I think that's something that is something that will be researched further in the future. These are the other materials we're using now. A lot of the bamboo itself is becoming more of a process, and being processed into blocks or strand woven dense materials, which can be utilized structurally in different ways. So I want to finish off on one project which kind of embodies this sense of idea of research and looking at sustainability and integration of architecture into nature and vice versa. And this is the design of what's something called it's called Utopia. This building here is what we call a drop pod. It uses composite panels. It's a very, very lightweight structure and has very minimal impact on the environment. And this place, Utopia, is a place which is set up by two girls here who have been big game changers. They set up an organization called Bye Bye Plastic Bags, which is a youth-led movement to tackle the problems of plastic pollution and waste. And their current project now is to create this space where change makers can come, or anyone interested in becoming a change maker can learn the skills and tricks and methods to create change and inspire change. And so we wanted to create a space which embodied all of this. So I'm going to show you another little video. Okay, do my screen thing. Okay. Just play this. This is in a very remote area. And what we are looking to do is use it as a place of exploration, to explore different types of bioholistic architecture that can be used as a base to develop further types of architecture, develop forms of sustainable living. And because it's for youth, it's playful. It has a story that goes around. So the idea is that you arrive here, and your entry into the whole site is via this flying fox, and through the tree canopies and arriving at the place. So here you come in, you're welcomed, and the first major building that you come across is the conference center, the amphitheater, the jewel which creates discussion and forums. So this is a very large, elaborate bamboo and tensile fabric structure. again, which uses geometry, the idea it attracts energy into the space. And here we have different various labs, all using their own, I guess, with their own language and using different technologies to structural systems and things to create their forms. Here we have something quite playful, which is a kind of netted structure, which is connected to the trees, connecting to different levels and areas which host various activities and classes. And here are the drop pods, and this is a I guess a way of exploring a compacted, minimal living, which these kind of pods could be dropped anywhere, and they're self-sustaining. And here, this area, this kind of pays respect to the existing vernacular on this which is common in this part of Indonesia. And these traditional buildings actually in themselves are very were always originally made from very sustainable materials. And in this case, they'll be used as the accommodation for the participants that come to these camps. Here by the beach is the nurturing, incubating restaurant, cooking class, eating hub. Yeah, again, this uses bamboo structures. But again, very expressive in terms of the philosophy of building and form, and kind of culture that wants to be created in this space. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, stop that, and I'll just finish off on let's see. Oh, yeah, where we are here. I'll finish off when we talk about culture. I think what we're doing is something that's actually happening worldwide anyway. We know people value wellness. People are more concerned about health, healing. We're fully aware the need to heal both ourselves and in terms of our own self-improvement, and also how that affects the wider world as well. I think we're all very aware how it's this micro-macro relationship is a form of culture that really is spreading, even in times where it seems like things are dark. We have an expressive desire, a deep desire to create change and a new way of living, and perhaps the idea of dense, these dense cities and the way we're living, even through COVID, has forced us to reevaluate the way we live. Could have a huge effect on design culture and the needs for something which is far more holistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. We will take the questions right away, so to save time. So this question
Okay.
from Russia, the mimicking in the projects is the form of the mimicking in the projects is in the form and the materials. Are trials to mimic something related to biosystems of nature and dealing with the context, for example?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, the whole idea of biomimicry is looking at how the functioning aspects, whether it's from the way the hairs on our skin move, or on an animal move to ventilate or create breathability. These are, you know, those kind of fundamental technologies are definitely very much an integral part of creating this kind of unified nature and man-made intervention.
Mhm. We will wait if anyone have question. Okay. This question from Leanne. Did your holistic project approach change after COVID-19?
It's yeah, in many ways it's created a deeper desire to push it as far as I can. I mean, this whole journey that we've been going on is a constantly evolving process. So going through COVID has further reinforced and further created desire to push for more holistic solutions to architecture.
Mhm. We are waiting more questions, if any. Okay, this is Loy here.
Yes, hi. Thank you
Hi
for
there.
a very interesting presentation. And as you mentioned in the beginning of it, that you studied architecture in a university in the UK, where there is a lot of disciplines and it's very systematic. Then you moved to an architecture in Bali with a lot of free lines, curved surfaces. How did this transformation happen? In your work, your life, inside you? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's interesting. I think in the UK, actually, the education system for design and architecture is pretty wild. It's pretty wild. It's kind of free, and it's very explorative. The culture of design from the education system. I think then what happens is when it's within the UK, when it's applied within a building context, it kind of gets trampled in many ways by you know, whether it's forms of commercialism or politics. It definitely gets dampened down. And then, funny enough, over here in Indonesia, there's, in terms of building, there is far less restrictions in terms of what you can, what your intentions are, and what you can build. Perhaps the educational side is actually far more kind of old. I wouldn't say old-fashioned, but kind of more traditional in terms of engineering and how and engineering, traditional engineering dictates the outcome of a building. So it's a big vice versa thing going on. And I think coming to Indonesia, where there is a culture of being able to make anything, you know, people here are craftsmen. They not only can they do things from a hand level, you can see the way they build. There's nothing really too impossible for them. So it's definitely given me that freedom to really explore a lot of the concepts that I had developed previously in my education in England. Now I'm being able to manifest them here on this side of the world.
Okay, we have an interesting question here from Afnan. Would you consider a project in a desert-like environment? And if so, how would you approach the project in terms of materials used, shapes of the design?
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes us human is our adaptability to different environments. That's probably why we've, as a species, we've survived better than most. And I think, yeah, I mean, if for designing in a desert environment, if there's a real function and need required, then a solution can be found. Obviously, a lot of materials and things like that are different in the Middle East. So it always helps to be contextual to your local and surrounding environment. And obviously, in terms of the environmental conditions are also very different. But if even in a desert, life exists. There are plants that can sustain themselves throughout many lifetimes. So we've got to look at that kind of nature within a desert environment and see how we can mimic that in our architecture.
We have a question from Russia. From the economical perspective, what is the initial cost and running cost comparing with the conventional building or modern buildings, let's say?
Well, I think you've got to look at it over a long-term issue. I mean, it depends what approach we take. I mean, I think people, when they think of sustainable building, they think it's expensive because of things like solar panels and a lot of the tech that goes in. Which of course it requires a larger investment at the beginning, but obviously over the long term, during the life of the building, the costs reduce exponentially through its running costs. But in terms of materiality, I mean, when you see the way we build things, whether we're using bamboo or recycled timbers, or we're using composite materials, and we're, there's aspects where for example, the building is much lighter. So when there's a lightness of building, it reduces our cost of foundations. So in many examples of a lot of this kind of architecture we've explored, we've actually reduced our building costs in many ways. So yeah, it all depends on which kind of angle you take at it.
Mm-hmm. So the last question we have is from Riyadh. What are the structural characteristics of bamboo beams and how to maintain it during the year?
So bamboo is very, structurally is very interesting material. I mean, in terms of its strength to weight ratio, it's one of the strongest materials out there. In a strength to weight ratio, if you compare it to steel, it's much higher. But obviously, you've got to combine it in a certain way to be able to create the same sort of spans. But I think you look at the way you design with bamboo, it's not a straight replacement for conventional building materials. You kind of organize the geometries or the layering up of members in different ways to fit the functions of the building. In terms of its longevity, a lot of it depends on its treatment. The main aspect of bamboo which makes it not last so long is its sugar content, which makes it then susceptible to termites. But if it's harvested at the right time and then also treated, we tend to treat it here with borax, which is a natural salt, which kind of removes the sugars and makes the whole thing termite resistant. generally for the lifetime of the building. As long as bamboo is kept dry, as long as it's kept under cover, it's not exposed, then the bamboo will last an incredibly long time.
Okay, Charlie, we can wrap up now. Thank you again for accepting our invitation and being with us tonight. And thank you for everyone. Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye now. Bye, everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.